Sonoma Land Trust is a community-supported nonprofit that protects the open, natural, and working lands of Sonoma County to provide clean air, clean water, and healthy communities. Since 1976, we have conserved over 61,000 acres of vital landscapes, including redwood forests, tidal wetlands, coastal prairies, and wildlife corridors. Land trusts play a key role in preserving natural resources, reducing climate risks, and ensuring future generations can thrive. We accomplish our work through the generosity of our community and are grateful for all that we have achieved together. We would also like to acknowledge that we stand upon the unceded ancestral lands of many Indigenous peoples. We honor their knowledge, care, and stewardship of this special place across the ages, and acknowledge the deep and lasting damage that colonization has inflicted on them. We embrace our responsibility to learn from and protect their cultural and traditional connections to the land. We are absolutely thrilled to have Jeff Miller joining us tonight. Jeff is a lifelong conservationist, passionate advocate for wildlife, and the author of Bay Area Wildlife, an Irreverent Guide. In a time when habitat loss and climate change are placing unprecedented pressure on our native species, Jeff offers both inspiration and action, inviting us to connect with our wild neighbors and become better stewards of the places we call home. From steelhead trout in Alameda Creek to burrowing owls and coastal migrations, Jeff has spent over 25 years fighting for some of the Bay Area's most iconic and imperiled wildlife. His new book highlights over 100 local species, mammals, birds, marine life, and more, and we're excited to hear his take on what's thriving, what's threatened, and how we can help protect the incredible biodiversity in our own backyard. Please join me in welcoming Jeff Miller.
Thanks, Gina, for the introduction, and thank you, Sonoma Land Trust, for hosting, and thank you, everyone, for tuning in tonight. I'm a senior conservation advocate with the Center for Biological Diversity, and I'm the founder and director of the Alameda Creek Alliance. And I have been living in the Bay Area for about 50 years. I have to confess up front that I'm not a professional biologist. I'm an amateur naturalist and a wildlife enthusiast. So I do have nearly 30 years of experience and expertise as a professional wildlife advocate, and I've been spearheading conservation efforts and campaigns for dozens of some of our most iconic Bay Area species, things like foothill yellow-legged frogs, delta smelt, green sturgeon, Alameda whipsnake, burrowing owls, golden eagles, and more. And I'm a proud native of the People's Republic of Berkeley. I've spent more than 50 years exploring around the Bay Area while bicycling, running, kayaking, hiking, and bushwhacking, and most thoroughly as a hardcore birder, which tends to take you to some interesting places such as remote marshes and sewage treatment ponds when you go to new towns. I have to start with a little bit of a political preamble, just given the times we're in. We're facing an era of unprecedented attacks on all of our conservation laws, on our public lands, attempts to criminalize even the ideas of protest and advocacy. So a really important time. I'll just say be grateful if you live in California. It's a very important time to be active nationally, but also active on a state level, regionally, and locally. We'll leave it at that. I will say I hope people are taking care of themselves and each other and looking out for those who are most vulnerable in a time that we're really facing a backlash of hatred and racism, misogyny, and ecocide. And I hope people are taking the time they need and getting out and protecting those who are most vulnerable. So enough of politics. Let's get to what you came for, which I presume is salacious stories of animal murder, sex, and mayhem. So we will get into it. So what is this guide? It's a watchable wildlife guide for the greater San Francisco Bay Area. It covers the 9 counties ringing San Francisco Bay. It delves a little bit into the Delta, in the Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta, and I go a little bit down the coast, down to Monterey Bay. It's got 55 chapters covering about 100 native species from critters that are furry or feathery, slithery, and I even get a little bit into some invertebrates such as monarch butterflies and tarantulas and some creatures like that. So this is a practical guidebook. It actually will tell you where, when, and how to encounter the Bay Area's most interesting and unusual fauna. Sorry, I'm having a problem with my screen going back and forth. Can people still see the? Sorry about that. So this is a practical guidebook. It'll take you outside to basically encounter what I consider our charismatic animal ambassadors. So these are critters that are iconic, they're endemic, or they have dramatic behavior or stunning congregations. And the way I tried to write the book was as if we're sitting around a campfire and I'm trying to convince you that you absolutely need to go see and connect with a special animal or make a pilgrimage to view an unusual natural phenomenon. For example, trust me, this summer, if you haven't already, you're going to want to witness the flyout of 250,000 bats from the Yellow Bypass during the summer. Or in this fall, you're going to want to go to San Rafael and watch the tornado vortex of about 30,000 Vox's swifts pouring themselves down a huge chimney at a former brick factory. So what inspired me to write this book is that I've spent my entire life pretty much falling in love with the natural world of the Bay Area, and I've spent most of my adult life fighting to protect it. So this book is kind of like my love letter to the Bay Area region. And the book's illustrator is eco-philosopher Obi Kaufman, who's noted that people protect what they love and they love what they know. So this book is written in the belief that people will care more about the animals and places that they have direct experience with. So it's hopefully inspiration to get out and explore and connect with the bioregion. And the intent is to provide a better understanding of our wildlife neighbors and spark curiosity so that you want to more fully explore your kinship with the animals that surround us. All right, why irreverent? Aside from the fact that I'm a pretty irreverent guy, I wanted to write a guide that was, I envisioned something that if Ursula Le Guin and Hunter S. Thompson collaborated, that's what I wanted my guidebook to look like. Something informative, but also interesting, amusing, engaging, and I wanted to delve into the personalities a little bit of the animals that I cover. The reason is a lot of conservation work is advanced through just really mind-numbing legal filings and dry, stilted writing that ends up in peer-reviewed journals and ecology papers. And the general public is never going to read those things. So, and as humans, we respond to interesting stories. So I wrote this. I hope this is your antidote to dry nature tomes. And I think my mom provided the best review of my book. She called it The Blazing Saddles of Wildlife Guides. And actually, there is a lot of reverence in the book, both for the animals I cover and for nature. I personally have a nature-based spirituality, and I want people to revere these animals as neighbors and as kin and as relations. So if you indulge me, I'd like to start off by reading from the book about one of my favorite birds, which is the loggerhead shrike. So loggerhead shrike, the butcher bird. Behold the butcher bird, a compact black mass killer that only weighs as much as 2 AA batteries and belies its small stature with an outsized murderous habit of impaling its prey on spikes. Its predatory nature is unusual for a songbird, earning the loggerhead shrike the title of honorary raptor. Where shrikes hunt the grasslands, small animals end their lives skewered onto thorns or barbed wire fences. Their barbarous behavior is aided by a sharply hooked bill with cutting edges and notches called tomial teeth. But birds don't have teeth, remember? Used for severing the spinal cords of their victims with a precision bite to the nape. Because they lack large talons for grasping or tearing, shrikes resort to impaling insects, lizards, small mammals, or tiny birds for easy dining or to save for later. Thus the nicknames butcher bird or thorn bird. Caches of speared food come in handy for shrikes during breeding season when they need extra energy, or in winter when prey is scarce. An industrious shrike can turn a barbed wire fence into a gruesome art installation. I call this one Still Life with Lizard, and my latest work over there is Mouse Decomposing. So some good places to find shrikes locally are Schollenberger Park and at Tole Lake Regional Park. And I strongly encourage you to check out the Death on the Plains website. It's a photo essay of loggerhead shrike food caches from Colorado, everything from beetles to snakes to lizards to small mammals. It's really impressive, the array of skewered critters. All right, so what's on tap right now in summer? We have in the Bay Area in summer some amazing watchable wildlife and congregations of critters. So here's what's on tap, and you could potentially go see this summer using this guide. First off is the badger, the American badger. And I urge you to get out into our grasslands to see if you can find one of our more elusive mammals. And so what exactly is a badger? Basically, you start with a skunk, you juice it up on steroids, you add some wicked claws, and then hybridize it with a tank, and that's a pretty good approximation of a badger. They're denizens of open grasslands with sandy soils, and they're one of the fastest digging animals on planet Earth, essentially rototillers with fur. So they use those powerful bodies, their shovel-like paws, and those huge, strong claws to unearth and ambush ground squirrels and gophers. And badgers themselves are a keystone species for the health of grassland ecosystems. Their digging helps in soil development, and their abandoned burrows shelter an array of wildlife such as foxes, skunks, burrowing owls, California tiger salamanders, and California red-legged frogs. And far from being a bother, badgers help control rodent populations. They kill venomous snakes, they eat insects, and they clean up carrion. Badgers are declining in the Bay Area as they are throughout California, and they're listed as a state species of special concern. They require large areas of grassland habitat and are quickly eliminated when their home range is fragmented by houses, malls, farms, and roads. And they also have a tendency to become roadkill, especially in the summer. The use of rodent poisons is kind of a double whammy for badgers. It both eliminates their prey and subjects them to secondary poisoning. And most people have no idea that badgers live in the Bay Area, which is really a win for the badgers, which tend to avoid humans and just want to be left alone to snooze in their burrows, waddle around, and engage in some recreational rototilling while snacking on gophers. So if you do go searching for badgers, you should temper your expectations a little, because even in prime badger habitat, you're far more likely to see their diggings than the actual creature. So you can find badgers spring through fall. They are much more detectable now during summer when young badgers are dispersing. And your best opportunity to see them is going to be at Point Reyes National Seashore. If you really want to up your odds, you can take a safari with guides at Point Reyes Safaris, who can also get you on other critters like bobcats, coyotes, foxes, maybe even a long-tailed weasel or a mountain lion. And then locally, in Sonoma, you can find badgers at the Jenner Headlands Preserve and kind of the infamous little postage stamp Paula Lane Nature Preserve in Petaluma. All right, another summer critter, if you want an adrenaline rush, is the rattlesnake. So the only venomous snake we have in the Bay Area is the northern Pacific rattlesnake. And despite their fearsome reputation, rattlers are not aggressive towards humans and won't strike or bite you unless they're provoked or perceived danger. Most of the rattlesnakes you're going to encounter will be harmlessly sunning themselves on a trail or road. And if you just leave them alone, use some common sense, and allow that nope rope to just move along, they are not a threat. Just remember that it costs a snake a lot of energy to produce venom, and they need to save it for their prey. That's the reason why up to half of all rattlesnake bites on people are dry with no venom injected. And then this probably is not going to be a surprise to you, but those statistically most likely to get snake bit are young, drunk dudes. So, and I hear having a mullet ups your odds of getting bit. So just to provide some perspective, research shows that you were 73 more times to be killed by a deer in the United States. That would be hitting it while driving your car, than by a snake of any kind. And those statistics include people who regularly gamble with tissue necrosis by keeping and handling venomous snakes in captivity. So usually don't have to worry. So rattlesnakes are equipped with an impressive array of sensory and chemical tools to detect and subdue their meals, which are mostly ground squirrels and other rodents, rabbits, and birds. They have heat sensors in the pits between their eyes and nostrils. They have chemoreceptors to smell prey, which are activated when they flick their tongue. And they have enhanced sensitivity to movement and vibrations, which are detected through their jawbone. And then there are those bulging venom glands, which give their head that distinctive triangular shape. And when it's time to kill their prey, they deploy hinged hollow fangs that unfold and lock into place, delivering a measured dose of venom containing hemotoxins and neurotoxin. And envenomation not only kills a bitten squirrel or rabbit, but it also stops the prey animal from fleeing due to shock and paralysis. And it even helps the snake, it aids the snake in starting to digest them. All right, let's dispel a few myths about rattlesnakes. Rattlesnakes cannot leap or jump. They strike by lunging 1/3 to 1/2 of their body length. That's with or without coiling first. Another myth, so adult Western rattlesnakes usually grow to about 3 feet long, rarely to 4 feet. So if you have a friend who told you about seeing a 6-foot rattlesnake, they were probably hyperbolic or a little adrenaline impaired. And then the last myth is you cannot necessarily age a rattler by counting the rattles on their tail. They add a new rattle each time they shed their skin, which can be more than once a year. All right, let's get into the fun stuff. The salacious details of intertwining serpent reproduction, which involves aligning cloacal openings, wraparound pulsing, and paired external genitals. Paired is in 2 sets of genitalia for each snake. So snakes only use one at a time during mating, but it's always good to have a backup. And biologists have long known that male snakes have 2 penises called hemipenes, with research on male reproductive anatomy dating back to 1674. But it wasn't until 2022 that research was published revealing that female snakes indeed have clitorises. And again, yes, two per female snake. So this finding implies that snake mating involves seduction and gratification. And unsurprisingly, it was female herpetologists who confirmed that lady snakes have pleasure centers, since male researchers had been unable to find the clitorises for, let me check the math here, 348 years. So that tracks. All right. Again, rattlers, you're most likely to see them during spring and summer. And if you want to encounter them locally, good places to look are Trione Annandale State Park, Sugarloaf Ridge State Park, or Montini Open Space Preserve. All right, I already mentioned bats. So less than a 2-hour drive from Santa Rosa is the Yolo Causeway. That's the elevated Highway 80 freeway over the seasonally flooded Yolo Bypass wildlife area. That's between Davis and Sacramento. And this is where hundreds of thousands of bats lodge themselves in the bridge's expansion joints. That's them in the lower right photo there, directly under commute traffic, using that as their daytime roost. So I'd like to read to you from my bat chapter. Cheers, skål, salud, and chin chin. Let's take a moment and raise a toast to bats, the planet's only flying mammals. Obviously, we celebrate bats for their ability to hoover up prodigious numbers of mosquitoes every evening. We should also be grateful for the decimation of beetles and moths, with bats providing U.S. farmers an estimated $23 billion annually in free pest control and reducing the need for pesticides. So pull up a lawn chair and pour yourself a beverage while watching the massive sunset bat fly out at Yolo Causeway near Davis. That's where up to 250,000 Mexican free-tailed bats congregate during summer months, roosting and hanging out upside down with their friends during the day beneath the 3-mile-long bridge. At dusk, the bats awaken to stage a mass exodus. They stream out from under the causeway in seemingly endless ribbons, disgorging into the twilight to join the evening mosquito hunt. Thank you, bats. Your drink of choice while toasting the bats should be a fermented cactus beverage, so you can ponder the magical relationship between agaves, long-nosed bats, Homo sapiens, and yeast. Because arguably the most valuable service bats have gifted to humankind is pollination of the agave plants that are used to produce tequila. Margarita drinkers throughout the world should pay homage to Mexico's lesser long-nosed bats. Though they don't occur in the Bay Area, these bats fertilize the agaves harvested for tequila and mezcal. This bat species was formerly imperiled because of habitat loss, but recovered enough to be taken off the endangered species list in 2018. However, a boom in mezcal consumption has led to overharvesting of agaves before they can produce the nectar the tequila bats rely on. Do your part by purchasing bat-friendly mezcal, which is harvested sustainably and leaves flowering agaves behind for the hardworking bats. So the Yolo Basin Foundation offers summertime bat events from late June through September when the masses of bats are present. And of course, the Sonoma Land Trust provides access to public viewing of bats at Laufenberg Ranch Preserve in Healdsburg through scheduled events if you want to go local. And then nearby, Olompali State Historic Park in Marin has 5 resident and migratory species of bats. And another great bat spot that's not too far away is Black Diamond Mines Regional Preserve in Antioch. And in July and August, the East Bay Regional Park District hosts Bat Watch Wednesdays at Black Diamond Mines for evening monitoring of the pallid bats and the canyon bats that roost there in an old mine tunnel. All right, other summer fun is leopard sharks and bat rays, eelgrass adventures, and I'd like to read to you from my chapter on these critters. Leopard shark and bat ray, eelgrass adventures. A simple Bay Area kayaking paddle can transform into a magical aquatic excursion once you encounter the creatures dwelling in estuarine eelgrass realms. Eelgrass is a marine seagrass that can grow in dense underwater meadows within shallow bays and estuaries, providing nursery habitat, food, and shelter for all kinds of marine life. Kayaking over eelgrass beds will give you glimpses into this underwater world and can bring communion with 2 enthralling eelgrass denizens, leopard sharks and bat rays. Drift quietly in your boat as squadrons of sleek 3-foot-long sharks with distinctive leopard patterned black spots and bars glide and fin underneath you like streamlined torpedoes. Watch graceful rays flying past underwater, gently flapping their pectoral fins like birds. Enjoy their effortless grace and power as they cruise through their watery and muddy world below. Sharks and rays are both cartilaginous fish that navigate using specialized bioelectrical sensors more than sight. Both species have their mouths on their undersides and depend on their electrosensory systems to locate prey, swimming along the bottom of estuaries and bays, scouring the mud and sand for shellfish, worms, fish eggs, crabs, shrimp, octopi, and small fish to hoover up. Leopard sharks and bat rays coexist and are often seen together, swimming through the safety of eelgrass forests and congregating in shallow waters of Bay Area tidal salt marshes during spring to give birth to live young and during summer to mate. Bat rays are so cool that they copulate while swimming along, the male underneath the female with synchronized wing beats. Both species are ovoviviparous, meaning the female produces eggs, but instead of laying them, they develop and hatch within the mother's body. The following spring, female rays and sharks give birth to live young, usually from 7 to 36 pups for leopard sharks and between 2 and 10 pups for bat rays. Bat ray pups are born tail first, with their wings wrapped around them like a burrito and their stinger encased in a protective sheet. Shark and ray pups eventually move from sloughs into the open water of the bay, where they are vulnerable to predation by 7-gill sharks, larger fish, seals, and sea lions. So the best ray and shark kayaking adventures around are, I would recommend you go to Drake's Estero in Marin, in Point Reyes National Seashore, or a little further down to Elkhorn Slough down in Monterey County. If you want to encounter them locally, you can try in Bodega Bay, several spots around Bodega Bay, and in Marin and Tamales Bay, Bolinas Lagoon, and Richardson Bay. All right, and our last summer critter that is on tap right now that you should go see are magpies. And I will read to you from my magpie chapter. So we have the yellow-billed magpie, a tiding of iridescence. No offense to the adorably plump and snazzy-looking California quail, but the Golden State's designated state bird should be changed to the yellow-billed magpie. This avian denizen of open oak woodlands and grassy oak savannas is endemic to California. While this magpie is the only bird species found exclusively within our state's boundaries, California quail have a range spanning 7 states and 3 countries. Yellow-billed magpies are gorgeous. With a tuxedo pattern of black and white, flashy iridescence in their wings, bright yellow beaks, and impossibly long tails. These flashy birds will hop enthusiastically along the ground to run down insects or other prey. They mostly eat bugs and acorns, but are not above making a meal of trash or roadkill. Famed local natural historian Malcolm Margolin perfectly captured the essence of magpies that pass through a Snow campground in the morning to check for food in the garbage cans. Quote, "Their elegance is almost embarrassing. It's like having members of the Metropolitan Opera Orchestra in full dress searching through your leftovers." Magpies are clamorous and highly social, foraging in large flocks and nesting in colonies. They're members of the corvid family, relatives of crows and jays, so it's no surprise that they're brash and gregarious. A congregation of these birds is called a tiding of magpies. Among their social behaviors, magpies hold a sort of funeral when one of their own is found dead, calling to attract others to the scene. Up to 40 magpies have been observed gathered around their dearly departed, chattering loudly for 10 to 15 minutes before dispersing. Communalist magpies construct their nests in proximity to each other, creating colonies of distinctively domed, loosely woven stick nests about 50 feet off the ground in groves of sycamore, cottonwood, or oak trees. Territorial disputes between two magpies are resolved by a comical and exaggerated parallel walk side by side along their territory boundary. This can end with a tail up display thrown in for good measure, the avian equivalent of flipping your neighbor the bird. Gangs of troublemaker young magpies will invade established nesting territories in the spring to test the boundaries and defenses of breeding pairs and to see if they can take over a prime breeding location. After nesting season is over, yellow-billed magpies still want to hang out with the crowd and may form nightly roosts of 50 or more birds. Groups of magpies will also gather to scold, dive bomb, and mob a potential predator, such as an owl, raptor, or bobcat. So our magpies are not doing well. The numbers in California have plummeted 76% between the late 1960s and 2015, and their range has been reduced due to loss of oak woodlands and sprawl development. Magpies are still treated as agricultural pests in some rural areas and are trapped and shot on some cattle ranches. They are also killed by rat poisons since they eat carrion, and their numbers have declined precipitously in areas that have high rodenticide use. And then the West Nile virus epidemic also hit magpies particularly hard from 2004 to 2006, with entire colonies wiped out and nearly half the state's population lost. And this magpie is one among hundreds of bird and animal species that are dependent on or associated with California oak woodlands. But more than a million acres of the state's oaks are under threat of being cut down to clear land for cattle grazing, growing grapes, or building subdivisions. And many oak species are not regenerating sufficiently due to fire suppression, intensive grazing by cattle, and invasion by weedy annual grasses. So magpies you can see year-round, but they're more conspicuous during their breeding season, which starts in February and goes through July. You cannot generally find this species in the North Bay, more of an East Bay species. But if you go to Solano County, you can see magpies at places like Puda Creek State Wildlife Area, Lake Solano Park, Puda Creek Riparian Reserve, and Lagoon Valley Park. All right, so that's it. That's some of the highlights of what's on tap this summer. I do want to talk about perhaps what I think is perhaps the most important part of my book is the conservation message throughout. And I'm just one of many who are warning about the loss of biological diversity. Here in the San Francisco Bay Area, we've been identified as one of the nation's 6 most important biodiversity hotspots. So we're wealthy in a variety of plants and animals and ecotypes, but they're also facing numerous severe threats. As the human population of the Bay Area continues to explode, we're at nearly 8 million people now. Sprawl development is rapidly eliminating and fragmenting our remaining wildlands and habitat for imperiled species. So I offer up stories about our animal neighbors as parables for the Anthropocene. The Anthropocene, of course, being the current period during which human activity has completely altered the climate, the environment, and much of the Earth's landscapes. And the late E.O. Wilson, who was a renowned scientist and myrmecologist, that's the study of ants, who was known as the father of biodiversity, warned us that if we do not turn the tide, the upcoming biological age could be known as the Aramesoic era, or the age of loneliness, after the 6th great extinction wave leaves our planet pretty much depaupered of biodiversity due to human activities. And yes, unfortunately, in this scenario, we humans are the metaphorical meteorite. Now, a swelling chorus of scientists and experts is ringing out the ominous prediction that at least 1 million species on our planet could be lost to the extinction crisis within our lifetimes. So I highlight a trio of endemic Bay Area species that unfortunately have been lost to extinction. And the first is the Berkeley kangaroo rat in the upper left there, an endearing little critter that hopped around on long, powerful hind legs. It had a lengthy tail with a tufted tip and stored seeds in its furry little cheek pouches. So it lived only in the Berkeley Oakland Hills east to Mount Diablo. And the entire species was wiped out by 1940 due to poisons that ranchers spread for ground squirrels, sprawl development, and predation by feral cats. So a little less cuddly, but just as ecologically essential, down below was the sooty crayfish, a small freshwater crustacean that was once common enough to be harvested for Bay Area food markets. It was displaced by introduced non-native crayfish and was gone by the early 1900s. And then in the upper right what was the Xerces blue butterfly, which lived only in coastal sand dunes in the Sunset District in western San Francisco and depended on lupins and other native host plants. And it was wiped out by development, and the last individual butterfly was seen in 1942. And then I ask readers to remember animals that have been extirpated from our region. So some charismatic megafauna that used to roam the Bay Area, such as the grizzly bear, whose ghost definitely still haunts the Golden State. The last grizzly in Sonoma County was hunted and killed around 1890, and the last grizzly in California was shot in 1922. So the closest grizzlies now are in Idaho, but obviously it's still on the state flag. It's memorialized by local names such as Grizzly Peak in the East Bay and the bear statues that are everywhere at UC Berkeley. But now, a century after its disappearance, more and more people are insisting that grizzly bears should return to the Golden State. The California Grizzly Alliance and native tribes are advocating for reintroduction of grizzlies to historic remote habitats in California, such as the high Sierras. Gray wolves. Gray wolves aren't waiting for humans to act. They've been migrating south into California from Oregon since 2015. And as of a couple months ago, there are now 10 established wolf packs in California with 78 wolves from the Oregon border, mostly northeastern California, but in the mountains around Lake Tahoe and all the way into the southern Sierra. Unfortunately, ranchers are already trying to have them killed or removed. And I'm not suggesting that wolves will make it back to the Bay Area anytime soon, but they could get pretty close. It could get interesting. All right, the California condor, the thunderbird, back from the brink. You got to give some love to the scavengers. This is nature's ultimate cleanup crew. So the condor, of course, nearly went extinct, mostly from being shot by dumb humans, and more insidiously from secondary lead poisoning from scavenging on lead-tainted carcasses. And it turns out the lead is just absolute kryptonite for condors. A single lead shot can kill an adult condor if ingested. So the entire species was down to only 22 birds in the 1980s when they were taken into a captive breeding program, which was improbably and wildly successful. We now have about 350 California condors in the wild. This is a photo of a condor named Marie Antoinette that I took at Pinnacles National Monument, which shows how close you can get to these amazing birds. So you can go see the condor flocks in Pinnacles, all along another flock all along the Big Sur coast. Those two flocks have linked up. There's a reintroduction area just east of San Simeon, and condors were recently introduced into Northern California. And the good news is that condors from the Big Sur and Pinnacles flocks have started exploring the Diablo Range the last 3 or 4 years. Flocks of them coming up and circling Mount Diablo, raising hopes that they will eventually roost or even nest here in the Bay Area. So I talked about lead. I worked on condor conservation for 15 years, and in 2019, we finally got the state of California to ban all lead ammunition for all hunting, which is helping, but has not completely solved the problem. And this is a photograph of a radiograph of a deer from a program down in Big Sur, where they asked hunters to bring their deer by after they shot it, and they radiographed it and showed the hunters. You can see the bullet entry path here, just showing the hunters how dangerously contaminated the game they eat is. So you notice just the absolute snowstorm of lead particles and fragments and dust that you are potentially feeding to your family if you eat lead shot game. And that has convinced many hunters to switch to copper and non-lead alternatives. And then finally, my book discusses some of the best tools we have for wildlife protection, which are conservation laws such as the Endangered Species Act, which unfortunately are now all under Trump assault. And I'll definitely talk about how to connect and get involved in keeping those protections around. So we have nearly 50 animals in the Bay Area that are listed as threatened or endangered species under the Endangered Species Act. And incredibly, not a single one has gone extinct while protected under the Endangered Species Act. Don't worry, water diverters and developers are working hard to try to ruin that stat, but it's a very effective law. And I also cover just the breadth, the importance, and the power of local conservation groups around the Bay Area and provide ways for people to plug in. Yeah. All right, there are plenty of depressing environmental losses, but I really want to talk about some Bay Area wildlife success stories. And we'll start with a number of iconic species that have returned to the Bay Area themselves once we humans stop killing, poisoning, or persecuting them. And we will start with the whales because incredible comeback of the baleen whales. So hard to believe today, but all of the Pacific whales were hunted nearly to extinction in the early 1900s. And it's estimated that industrial whaling removed about 2 million whales. And a science writer noted that each whale removed, each one that was harpooned left a hole in the ocean far bigger than the creature itself. So I talk about how pooping whales could possibly help save the world. And that's because whales are oceanic ecosystem engineers, and they help perpetuate the building blocks of marine life. So they eat iron-rich krill. They release that essential mineral back into the ocean when they defecate, and that iron in whale poop is fertilizer that stimulates the growth of tiny phytoplankton. The krill eat the phytoplankton, the whales, fish, and almost everything else in the sea eats the krill, and the marine food web flourishes, at least until modern humans entered the picture. And then plus each whale is, whales are trying to do their part for climate change. Each whale is a massive carbon sink. Those that sink to the bottom sequester an incredible amount of carbon. And off the Bay Area coast, we are very lucky. We have blue whales, which are the largest animals to ever live on Earth, reaching up to 90 feet long, 300,000 pounds, which is the weight of a herd of 15 to 20 elephants. And fortunately, all of our baleen whale species in the Eastern Pacific are recovering. There's now an estimated 1,500 blue whales off the Pacific coast, about 2,400 humpbacks whales off of California and Oregon coasts, and an estimated 20,000 more gray whales in the Central California population alone. And you can easily go see whales up close and personal just offshore if you take a boat trip out of Bodega Bay, San Francisco, Half Moon Bay, or Monterey Bay. All right, another comeback kid. I guess we got to talk about bald eagles. Us birders sometimes get jaded about bald eagles and other charismatic megafauna that steal all the attention. We're busy looking at some obscure, unidentifiable flycatcher while people want to point out the bald eagle. So bald eagles, definitely making a comeback here. Bald eagles, of course, notoriously like to steal fish from osprey and drive smaller birds off of carcasses, which technically makes them a kleptoparasite, which is an ecological description that doesn't quite have the noble ring that national myths are made of. So I talk about how this bird might be an unintentionally apt totem for America, a nation built on theft of land from Native Americans and theft of labor from African slaves. Not the eagle's fault, though. But national symbolism aside, bald eagles are a huge local success story, and they're back from the brink after the ban of DDT, the pesticide that causes eggshell thinning and led to nesting failures, the passage of the Bald and Golden Eagle Protection Act, and a stint where they actually were protected under the Endangered Species Act. So now we have about 40 to 50 breeding pairs of bald eagles in the greater Bay Area. And if you want to see them locally, just easiest way to see bald eagles, head to your local reservoir. So Lake Sonoma Recreation Area and Lake Berryessa are a couple great spots to see bald eagles. All right, peregrine falcons, the screaming death parrots. So these birds were also DDT victims. By the early 1970s, there are only 2 nesting pairs of peregrines remaining in all of California. Just recently, we were back up to, after a very successful reintroduction effort, peregrines rebounded. We had about 50 pairs in the greater Bay Area. But unfortunately, the avian flu seems to be now taking out the Bay Area's peregrines. So peregrines have been called feathered fighter jets due to their 200-mile-per-hour stoop. That's the predatory dive that makes them the planet's fastest animal. and the effective way that they dispatch small to medium-sized birds. And that bottom photo is a death parrot that I watched dive on, attack, and kill and eat a western gull. And that photo is taken at the moment that it bit the nape and the spinal cord at the nape of its neck and ended its life. That's a bird much larger and heavier than itself. And that black hood that peregrines have definitely adds to the executioner vibe. So I call the peregrine falcon the screaming death parrot, and that is because genetic evidence was published in 2014 that suggests that falcons are actually more closely related to parrots than they are to hawks. So they look very similar, they act very similar, but that is due to convergent evolution. In fact, falcon and hawk lineages evolved separately after the breakup of the Gondwana supercontinent, which happened more than 100 million years ago. So falcons evolved in South America, and hawks evolved separately in Africa. So from an evolutionary perspective, a falcon can be viewed as more of a murderous parrot than a hawk. So modern peregrines are evolving to use our cities and bridges as urban cliffs, which is a nesting habitat that's in short supply in nature. And you can find some famous local nesting pairs at places like the Campanile, Cedar Tower at UC Berkeley, where they started nesting in 2017. Hate to say it, but unfortunately, the cow falcons are missing this breeding season and suspected they may have been victims of the bird flu. San Jose City Hall is another place where they're nesting. And then locally, you've got peregrines nesting at Jenner Headlands Preserve and around Bodega Bay. And then that top middle photo, if you're wondering what that is, I will just say Google copulation hats or hump helmets and peregrines, and you will learn all about how bird genitalia headgear helped with the captive peregrine breeding and reintroduction. And I'll just say birders are a weird breed, but falconers are even stranger. And it's all true. All right, another comeback story is the coyote. And I call my coyote chapter Return of the Trickster. So the coyote has been the most persecuted large mammal in American history, more than any other predator. But due to their resiliency, for the last 500 years, coyotes have continued to expand their range in North America. And they've been colonizing new areas, even amidst settler societies that are pretty hell-bent on eradicating them. So coyotes' latest magic trick is turning California cities into habitat. And most of you probably know there are several dozen coyotes living throughout urban San Francisco. Basically, any park or green or open space in San Francisco of a good enough size hosts coyotes. And there are an astounding 5,000 coyotes living in the Los Angeles basin. Locally, if you want to see coyotes, best places are Point Reyes National Seashore, anywhere in the Marin Headlands and the Golden Gate National Recreation Area. In the East Bay, Snow Regional Wilderness, a great place to see them. And locally in Sonoma, often seen at Tole Lake Regional Park and at Trione-Annandale State Park. All right, another comeback story, the river otter. I jokingly label river otters the aquatic death weasels, and that's mostly due to the tendency of some West Marin family units of otters, which form these mucilid strike teams, and they work together to ambush and drown and eat brown pelicans. And that bottom photo is from Point Reyes, from Abbott's Lagoon, where I watched a family of otters distract pelicans while others dove below and attacked and ate them. And I got to watch the entire hunt and dispatching of that pelican and feasting on it. Don't worry, pelicans are doing great. A few can be taken to feed river otters. And river otters themselves were once extirpated completely from the Bay Area, but they've pretty much reintroduced themselves, and they're now expanding quite a bit around the Bay. They're a really good indicator species of water quality and the well-being of entire watersheds, since they can range from the headwaters all the way down to the coast. And the return of river otters to the Bay Area offers some hope for healthier ecosystems. And despite the pelican mayhem, I think they still remain effective ambassadors for protecting and restoring our local creeks and rivers. And that photo on the upper right is that's that same family group in Point Reyes. That I watched them swim up to their favorite sand dune that they slide down and just roll around happily and quickly turn themselves into otter churros. So highly entertaining to see. You can see them also all throughout Point Reyes. Rodeo Lagoon and the Marin Headlands is a good place to see them. And then locally in Sonoma, the mouth of the Russian River at Jenner, Sonoma Valley Regional Park, the Napa Sonoma Marshes Wildlife Area, and in the Napa River are all good places to see river otters. All right, black bears. I'm sure all of you know black bears are returning to the Bay Area and expanding their domains. I call them furry foodies because they like to sample artisanal. In the North Bay, they like to sample artisanal berries and nuts and honey and truffles, and yeah, they fit right in with the North Bay foodie culture. So we are seeing a kind of a slow motion ecological release with black bears in California. And ecological release is the phenomenon where you have a population increase when a species is freed from limiting factors. And in this case, black bears are moving down from the mountains to expand their range into lowland habitats that were formerly dominated by the more aggressive grizzly bears, which had been absent for more than a century. So it's taken that long for black bears to feel like it's safe to come down again. So black bears are increasing quickly in the North Bay. In 2020, there were 33 individual bears identified in Sonoma and Marin counties, and they are probably a lot more now. Good place to run into black bears is the Mayacamas Mountains east of Healdsburg. You can have arranged visits to the Mayacamas Mountains Sanctuary and the Modini Preserve, or you can just drive up the public Pine Flat Road and take your chances if you can see them from the road. Also at Sonoma Coast State Park, I know they've been seen a lot lately in the Willow Creek area, and at Sugarloaf Ridge State Park, where black bears actually breed. There's also been several sightings recently in Jenner, last couple months at the mouth of the Russian River. And experts think that black bears are going to keep expanding and are likely to move next into the remote forested regions of the Coast Range, the Diablo Range, and into the Santa Cruz Mountains. So we have a future with more black bears. And then our last success story is the Tule elk, which is our smallest of our 3 elk species in California. We had more than 500,000 Tule elk in the Central Valley and the Coast Ranges in our grasslands before European contact. But these elk were decimated by hunting and displaced by cattle grazing, and they were presumed extinct by the end of the gold rush. Fortunately, there was an isolated remnant herd of fewer than 30 elk in the San Joaquin Valley that sheltered on a ranch, and they were eventually, from that one herd and just 3 breeding animals, they were eventually reintroduced around the state. And as of 2020, there were 5,700 Tule elk throughout California in 22 herds, with more than 1,000 of those in the Bay Area. The largest Bay Area population is at Point Reyes National Seashore, where there's almost 400 free-roaming elk and more than 300 elk in the Tamales Point herd, which until recently was penned in by a huge fence on that peninsula. And I'm going to have to rewrite my Tule elk chapter due to our settlement agreement at Point Reyes National Seashore. I had kind of excoriated the Park Service for their prioritization of commercial cattle ranching in the national park and a plan to shoot Tule elk so that private cows could eat more public grass. And Center for Biodiversity and other conservation groups spent the last 10 years battling to protect the Tule elk and reached a settlement in January of this year that will retire most of the private cattle ranches and all of the dairies from Point Reyes and allow the elk to roam and expand. And the Park Service also tore down a portion of the Tamales Point elk fence. So those elk can now roam free and no longer will have huge die-offs during droughts. We are having to defend that settlement from Trump. Unfortunately, RFK Jr. is also sticking his nose in it, and rancher and ag lawsuits are challenging that settlement. I will say, if you like Tule elk and you believe in the concept of public lands, I urge you to boycott Strauss Dairy Products and Nyman Beef. Those are the 2 local folks doing the most to try to overturn the Point Reyes agreement. Spreading a lot of disinformation about the settlement and suing to overturn the park's new management plan and really trying to reprivatize our public parklands. The other elk herds in the Bay Area are the Alameda San Joaquin herd, which has about 100 elk, and a Santa Clara Mount Hamilton herd with about 150 elk. And there are no Tule elk in Sonoma County, but there have been a couple of Roosevelt elk, which is a larger subspecies that lives in Northern California, from Mendocino County that have visited Willow Creek within Sonoma Coast State Park, and it's possible that more elk could disperse south. More of the Roosevelt elk could disperse south into the state park. There's about 3,300 acres of forest lands there that are recovering from logging. So your closest to the elk herds are at Point Reyes and then at Grizzly Island Wildlife Area in Solano County in the Delta. I talk a lot about salmon and steelhead in my book. I've been doing salmon restoration for about 25 years in the Bay Area. And we are lucky. We have 3 species of salmonids that you can still witness during their spawning migrations in the Bay Area. Fall run Chinook salmon, which are spawning in November, December. Coho salmon, which are spawning December through early January. And steelhead trout, which spawn in the winter through spring, sometimes as late as April or May. And it's amazing that we still have these fish in the Bay Area due to dam building and logging of old growth forests, excessive freshwater diversions that are fueling agribusiness and sprawl development, and climate change induced extended drought. Almost every West Coast salmon population is now depleted or heading toward extinction. And I like to highlight salmon because their dramatic and perilous life cycle is perhaps one of the most arduous migrations in the animal kingdom. People really connect with the effort they go through to struggle upstream, find that suitable gravel substrate and cold water for spawning to continue their lineage, and then they die. And this drama is just a visceral expression of life and its will to continue. So there's a number of Bay Area stream reaches where you can kind of witness this ancient and inspiring cycle, most notably in Lagunitas Creek in West Marin, on the Russian River, particularly at the viewing area at the diversion dam in Mirabel Park. Now you can go see steelhead in Lower Alameda Creek in Fremont at a new fish ladder. And if you want to see coho on the peninsula on the San Mateo coast, you can go see them in Pescadero Creek at Memorial Park. And then locally, of course, you guys have most of the salmon in the Bay Area here in Sonoma. Obviously, the hatchery raised fish swim themselves back into the Warm Springs Fish Hatchery at the top of Dry Creek. I mentioned the fish ladder, the Russian River fish ladder in Mirabel Park. There's also a fish ladder in Healdsburg where you can sometimes see them jumping. You can see salmon in the Russian River at the mouth in Jenner. And you can find coho in the Dutchbill Creek lower tributary. And I know you also have steelhead in Sonoma Creek. And I contend that salmon are the soul of our rivers. And if we allow them to thrive, that these remarkable fish can teach us how to think like a watershed, meaning live within the limits of our local bioregion. So salmon have inspired a number of really significant restoration efforts around the Bay Area, notably Spawn's work to protect and restore salmon habitat along Lagunitas Creek in West Marin. The National Park Service has been releasing hatchery-reared coho into Redwood Creek and restoring the estuary and riparian areas at Muir Beach in an attempt to revive the salmon runs into Muir Woods. There's been extensive reintroduction of coho salmon into a number of the lower Russian River tributaries. And I mentioned the salmon viewing at the gallery at the diversion dam. That's the lower right photo there. And I've been working for the last 28 years with the Alameda Creek Alliance, championing steelhead restoration on Alameda Creek. We've secured the removal of a dozen small dams and fish passage barriers and construction of 5 fish ladders, which have allowed anadromous fish to access the watershed for the first time in 50 years. And the 2 photos on the left are the Bartweir fish ladder, an aerial view, on the lower left, and the inside the ladder, the upper left. In the last 2 winters, since the new fish ladders came into operation, we've had Chinook salmon, steelhead trout, and Pacific lamprey using newly built fish ladders in Fremont. In the South Bay, you've got South Bay Clean Creeks Coalition promoting Chinook spawning in the urban reaches of the Guadalupe River in San Jose, and then a group called Beyond Searsville Dam, which hopes to remove the 65-foot high Searsville Dam owned by Stanford University, and that would restore steelhead access to about 20 miles of historic habitat in San Francisco Creek upstream of Palo Alto. I'll just say the recent Klamath Dam removals were a huge inspiration. That was the largest dam removal project in U.S. history. We had 4 dams removed by the end of 2024, which freed up 420 miles of former salmon habitat, and salmon immediately moved upstream to spawn past all 4 of those dams. And the native tribes on the Klamath have been working to maintain and restore their salmon economy. And along the way, they've created just a really impressive river restoration economy and really catalyzed the dam removal movement. The next big target in California for dam removal is the Eel River, and there's two PG&E dams that look like they're going to come out. And locally in the Bay, we have our sights set on tearing down Searsville Dam, which I mentioned. We are going to need to stop Trump's insane water policies, as well as Governor Newsom's proposed Delta Tunnel and CITES Reservoir on the lower Sacramento River, which would add two more big straws and divert even more water, and pretty much would guarantee the destruction of all of our Central Valley salmon runs. All right, getting close to 8 here. I got a couple more critters for you, and then I'm going to wrap it up. So these are species that I think we need to be a little more proactive about reintroducing. They're not going to be able to re-inhabit the Bay Area that quickly on their own. And one of those is the beaver. So why do we call, those of us who work on creek and river restoration, why do we call beavers magical watershed restoration gnomes? Mostly because their stickworks, their dams and their stickworks serve up a huge smorgasbord of ecological benefits. So their dams and diversions basically raise the water table and act as a sponge for capturing and storing water. They control water in beneficial ways. So they slow water down. They slow down the stream flow. They reduce the intensity of floods, and they improve fish habitat by increasing the base flow, so your streams don't dry up as fast during the summer. They also help stabilize eroding stream banks. They prevent erosion. They trap silt. They filter pollutants, and they provide really effective and documented fire control breaks. And beavers may be the key to restoring watersheds that have been damaged by human development, logging, and cattle grazing. And they do all this work for free. So beavers were hunted to the brink of extinction for their fur, but are slowly reintroducing themselves around the Bay Area. And if you don't know the story of Wortha Dam, the return of the Martinez beavers, you can read about it in my book, or you can go to the Wortha Dam website, or even better, next weekend will be the annual Martinez Beaver Festival. It will be held June 28th, and you can learn all about why we need to bring these critters back. I maintain that we need to be parachuting beavers into every watershed around the Bay Area, and this is not a joke. That flyer on the lower right is from the California State Game Agency, which in the 1950s actually parachuted beavers into El Dorado National Forest, which is west of Lake Tahoe. We've just started a conversation about potential beaver reintroduction among water and land management agencies in the Alameda Creek watershed, and have now expanded that to the throughout the East Bay and the South Bay. In the North Bay, you can find beavers in Sonoma Creek, Napa River, and Puda Creek, and a lot of those beavers are offspring of the Martinez, the famous Martinez beavers. And then if you go anywhere along Carquinez Strait and throughout the Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta. All right, another critter that needs a little help from us, sea otters. And I label them adorable psychopaths. Yeah, they're cute, but male otters have a tendency for violent mating, and there are documented otter incidents of necrophilia and molesting baby seals. And it's very interesting to read the scientists reporting this kind of behavior in very scientific language. But before you consider our species morally superior, just remember our sordid history of interactions with sea otters, which were pretty mercilessly hunted and slaughtered for their luxurious fur. So much so to the point that the southern sea otter was believed extinct by the early 1900s. That's the ones off the continental U.S. coast. Luckily, a tiny population of fewer than 50 otters survived off the Big Sur coast, and they've been slowly recovering since they were protected as a threatened species in 1977. And there are now an estimated 3,000 sea otters off the California coast. So the Center for Biodiversity, in addition to getting the Endangered Species Act protections for sea otters, recently forced some policy changes that will help southern sea otters re-inhabit their historical range in the Bay Area and Northern California, all the way up to the Oregon coast. And returning sea otters to their former habitats is a critical piece that will help restore coastal kelp forests and estuarine eelgrass meadows. So if you really want to see sea otters, you got to go a little south, go offshore of southern San Mateo coast is the closest place. including Año Nuevo. And then if you go a little further south down to Elkhorn Slough and Point Lobos State Natural Reserve in Monterey County, those places are lousy with sea otters. And you can even get your kayak boarded if you want to. All right, last critter I want to talk about that needs help from us are burrowing owls. And these are our grassland sentinels. Burrowing owls have been in pretty steep decline in the Bay Area as their habitat has been paved over by development. And these underground owls are a reminder that open space doesn't mean empty space, and one person's weedy lot is another owl's happy home. So as late as the 1970s, there were more than 1,000 breeding pairs of burrowing owls in the South Bay alone. And now there are fewer than 25 pairs of breeding burrowing owls around the San Francisco Bay margin. And that is only due to emergency intervention measures, captive breeding, supplemental feeding, and coordinated releases in Santa Clara County. All of our breeding owls around the Bay are in Santa Clara County now. If you go a little further afield, like eastern Contra Costa, eastern Alameda County, at Altamont Pass, Santa Clara County, and Solano County, the greater Bay Area population is about 500 breeding pairs left. A lot of threats for these guys. Development is the biggest one, but up to 100 each year still get whacked by the Altamont Pass wind turbines. Ranchers still are killing the ground squirrels that these owls depend upon as excavators of their homes. And I actually wrote the first listing petition back in 2003 when we first tried to get the state to protect the burrowing owl in California under the State Endangered Species Act. But the state agencies unfortunately caved to pressure from developers and agricultural interests and refused to protect the owls. We had 20 years of very severe declines of these birds since then. And we petitioned again last year in 2024 to designate 5 imperiled California populations of burrowing owls as endangered or threatened under the state's Endangered Species Act. And that would include those in the Bay Area. So finally, in October 2024, the state took the first step and advanced the burrowing owl as a candidate species for listing under the State Endangered Species Act, and we will know in about a year the final outcome. Unfortunately for you guys, there are no longer breeding burrowing owls in the North Bay. We do get wintering owls that breed north of us that come in the winter and depart in the spring. And good places to find wintering burrowing owls are Point Reyes National Seashore, particularly in the Outer Point. And nearby in Solano County, if you go to Rush Ranch Open Space, or any of you who are birders, if you've ever birded northwest of Rio Vista along Robinson and Flannery Roads, a famous birding spot, you can find burrowing owls there. All right, and I will leave you with invertebrates. The invertebrates never get much love, so I want to give some love to our spineless friends here. So I want to inspire you to go out and look for nudibranchs. So I will read from my nudibranchs chapter called Hardcore Tide Pooling. Step with me off the edge of our continent into a watery wonderland just off the coast, where we'll explore a mysterious liminal world of tiny and bizarre sea creatures. During extreme low tides, the ocean retreats enough to expose the otherwise hidden aquatic universe of Bay Area coastal tide pools. Watch your step as we descend through 3 distinct tidal zones to visit with life forms adapted to a harsh environment of crashing waves and fluctuating water levels. First, we'll pass through the rocks of the splash zone, careful not to step on limpets, barnacles, or turban snails. Once we reach the intertidal zone, which the salty tide covers and uncovers twice daily, the party really starts. Behind forests of mussels blanketing rocky reefs, we'll find neon green sea anemones, scuttling hermit crabs, purple and orange sea stars, leathery licking chitons, and tiny darting silverfish doing the hustle back and forth as if their tidal pool were the Studio 54 dance floor. Low tide affords us a glimpse below into the eternally submerged subtidal zone, where larger fish cruise by, and we may spot spiny sea urchins, big crabs, or possibly a lobster or octopus. But what we've really soaked our sneakers for are the flamboyant nudibranchs. Some louts call them sea slugs, but that doesn't do them justice. Marine biologist and nudie researcher Victoria Kentner pronounced nudibranchs the gems of the tide pool. Nudibranchs are shellless marine mollusks with an aesthetic that could be described as Victorian steampunk electric boogie. Most of these fantastical beasts are only 2 inches long, and the smallest a mere 1/4 inch. They are often brightly colored, and some have alien-looking paired horns. The backs of others are festooned with feathery gills, sculptured protuberances, or otherworldly appendages. If these creatures are slugs, they're disco slugs dressed for a P-Funk concert. There are 3,000 known species of nudibranchs in the world's oceans, and luckily for us, about 100 of them occur in California's intertidal zone. They have whimsical names such as sea lemon, salt and pepper doris, hunchback doris, shaggy mouse, hammerhead dodo, chocolate aeoliad, and opalescent nudibranch, each one impossibly beautiful and more fantastical than the last. The Spanish shawl is an electric purple slug with a flaming red pelt of spikes. A Hopkins rose could be mistaken for a bubblegum pink bathroom scrubby. And a Goddard's aeoliad looks as if the lead singer's hair from an 80s metal band became sentient and slipped off into the sea. So if you want to go hardcore tide pooling, there are really good tide pools at Salt Point State Park, nearby at Dillon Beach, Tomales Beach Campground, and a little further south, Palomar Beach in Point Reyes. And one of the best is Duxbury Reef in Bolinas. And I strongly urge you to check out the website Bowie Branchia, which posits the question we've all been asking, which was David Bowie's fashion inspired by nudibranchs, or were they inspired by him? All right, a few last words. I really like to highlight success stories, and there's a ton of them in my book, but these conservation victories don't just happen by themselves. Many people have to spend decades campaigning, educating, fighting, litigating, protesting, securing funding, and doing the hard and often very non-glamorous work. So I would encourage you to find a way to get involved and bring whatever talents you have to organizations that are fighting this fight. And my final two messages, the first is that loving the earth is as important as fighting for it and grieving the ecological destruction we're witnessing. So make sure you're regularly getting out there to explore and enjoy. And my second message is bring back biophilia, love of nature. We humans possess an innate tendency to seek connections with nature and other animals. And I sincerely hope that modern humans can rediscover our kinship with the wild animals. About 80% of the photos on this slideshow were taken by me. I'm trying to make that 100%. I'm an amateur photographer, but fortunately I solicited some excellent photos from professional and accomplished wildlife photographers for the book. Where can you get the book? I will say, please do not buy it on Amazon. Although it's a few dollars cheaper there, their predatory practices screw over both publishers and authors. So you can buy it on my website, The Irreverent Naturalist, irreverentnaturalist.com, where you can also follow my birding and wildlife field trips and talks, or you can order it through the publisher, Heyday Books in Berkeley, heydaybooks.com. And it's also, fortunately, in bookstores around the Bay Area.